I realized something was wrong before the food even arrived. My wife had insisted on dinner, not casually suggested it. Insisted. She said it would be good for us, that we needed to reconnect, that work had been stressful and this would help clear the air. That alone should have warned me. In the 7 years we'd been together, she never pushed social plans this hard unless she wanted something. We were seated at a narrow table near the window of a high-end restaurant overlooking the river in Portland. Candlelight bounced off polished stone walls. Everything felt carefully chosen. Too carefully. Across from us sat her boss. His name was Kirill Morozov, 45 years old, broad-shouldered, calm in that unnerving way men get when they're used to being obeyed. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and a thin smile that never quite reached his eyes. The kind of man who shook your hand like he was assessing leverage, not greeting you. I was 47. An infrastructure consultant, comfortable life, not flashy. I wore a navy blazer I'd owned for years. I didn't belong in Kirill's world, and he knew it. My wife, Alina, looked radiant. 38. Pregnant glow, people like to say. Her hand drifted to her stomach often, not absent-mindedly. Deliberately, as if she wanted it noticed. The pregnancy had been announced 3 months earlier. She'd cried when she told me. Said it was unexpected but perfect. I believed her because I wanted to. Kirill ordered the wine without asking. Russian import. He spoke to the server like this was his house. Alina laughed at his jokes, touching his arm when she did. Small gestures. Intimate ones. The kind you don't notice until you do, and then you can't unsee them. They talked shop at first. Mergers, travel. Meetings I'd never heard about. I nodded along, contributing when I could, but the conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. Then it happened. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know. Kirill leaned closer to Alina and said something quietly. In Russian. I noticed because her posture changed. She answered him without hesitation. Fluent, soft, familiar. They didn't switch back. They just continued. I smiled. Lifted my glass. Played my role. They assumed I didn't understand a word. What they didn't know was that my mother had been born in Riga, that Russian had been the language of my childhood, that I had spent years translating documents before I ever learned engineering. I understood everything. At first, it was harmless. Comments about the wine, about how the restaurant reminded Kirill of St. Petersburg. Then the tone shifted. Kirill congratulated her, not on her work, on her timing. Alina laughed quietly, said everything was working exactly as planned. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass. Kirill asked if I was suspicious yet. She shook her head. Then she said it. She said I was happy, that I felt chosen, that I'd already started talking about baby names and colleges and weekend trips that would never include him. She called me trusting, then careless, then useful. Kirill smiled and said something I'll never forget. He said, good. He'll be a stable father. Better than the truth. My heart didn't race. It slowed. They spoke about dates, about how the timeline lined up with my conference trip to Vancouver, about how I'd never questioned the math. Then Alina rested her palm on her stomach and said in Russian with a softness that felt rehearsed, he thinks it's his. The room didn't spin. The noise didn't fade. Everything became painfully clear. 7 years of marriage condensed into one quiet realization. They were calm, comfortable, practiced. I was furniture. I let them finish. I let Kirill pour more wine. Then casually I raised my glass and said, in Russian, that the wine was excellent but the aftertaste lingered too long. The silence that followed was absolute. Alina's face drained of color. Kirill froze mid-smile. I met his eyes and added just as calmly that honesty always leaves a sharper finish. Neither of them spoke. I smiled, the same smile I'd worn all evening. And that's when dinner truly began. I didn't raise my voice. I asked one question that unraveled 2 years of lies in under a minute. No one spoke for several seconds. The waiter approached with practiced cheer and asked if everything was all right. Kirill nodded too quickly. Alina stared at the tablecloth like it might open and swallow her. I thanked the waiter and asked for a moment. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Kirill recovered first. Men like him always do. He adjusted his cuff, leaned back and smiled in a way that suggested mild amusement rather than panic. "You speak Russian," he said, this time in English, as if changing languages could reset the moment. "I do," I replied, fluently since childhood. Alina finally looked up. Her eyes were wide, searching my face for confusion, for doubt, for some hint that this was a misunderstanding she could still bend. She found none. Kirill laughed softly. "Then perhaps you misunderstood tone. Russian can sound harsh. Context matters." Alina seized that opening. "Yes, exactly. You know how literal translations—" I raised my hand. Not aggressively, just enough. "Don't," I said. "You were very clear, both of you." I repeated her words back to her. Not angrily, precisely, including the part about timing. Including the part about Vancouver. Including the part where she said I would raise his child, believing it was mine. I didn't raise my voice once. Her shoulders collapsed as if something inside her finally gave up pretending. Kirill's smile faded, replaced by calculation. He leaned forward now, elbows on the table, lowering his voice. "Let's be adults," he said. "This doesn't have to become ugly." That word told me everything. Ugly meant inconvenient for him, expensive, public. Alina reached for my hand. I pulled mine back before she could touch me. The motion startled her more than shouting would have. "Please," she said, "let me explain. It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I said. "And what you said." She started crying then. Real tears or practiced ones, I didn't know anymore. She said she'd been scared, that she didn't plan for it to go this far, that Kirill had promised to handle everything. Kirill didn't deny it. That was the most telling part. He simply said, "We were careful, careful," as if this were a merger, not a marriage. I asked one question. "How long?" Alina hesitated. Kirill answered instead. "Almost 2 years." 2 years. I nodded, doing the math silently. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the expensive clothes she said were bonuses, the way she'd grown distant right around the time. Kirill's firm acquired her division. I asked about the due date. Alina whispered it. December. Spoken like a confession. The timeline snapped into place with brutal clarity. I remembered the week in March I'd spent in Vancouver overseeing a project upgrade. Remembered how affectionate she'd been when I returned. How eager. How relieved. Kirill cleared his throat. "You don't have to make this harder than it already is. There are arrangements that can be made." There it was. The offer. He didn't say money, but it hung in the air. Support, discretion, silence. I stood. Both of them flinched. "I'm going to step outside," I said calmly. "When I come back, we'll finish this conversation or we won't. That depends on what you decide to say next." I walked out onto the sidewalk overlooking the river. Night air. Cold. Clean. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the version of my life I thought I had dissolve completely. When I went back inside, Alina was alone at the table. Kirill was gone. She said he'd taken a call, that he'd be back. Her voice sounded small now, stripped of confidence. "He told me he loved me," she said quickly. "He said he would leave his wife." I almost laughed. "When?" I asked. She didn't answer. I told her I knew about the calendar entries, the hotel charges, the way she'd labeled his initials as client review. Her face confirmed what I already knew. Kirill returned a few minutes later, coat already on. "I think it's best we pause this," he said. "Emotions are high." I looked at him and said in Russian this time that he should pay the bill, that it was the least he could do for wasting my time. He understood. I walked away without another word. That night I didn't go home. I drove until the city thinned and parked at a 24-hour diner off the interstate. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and sat staring at my reflection in the window, replaying every moment of the past 2 years with new eyes. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. By morning, I discovered proof they never thought I'd look for. And once I did, there was no going back. I went home just after sunrise. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not peaceful, suspended, like everything inside was holding its breath, waiting to see who I would become now that the truth had stripped the paint off my life. Alina's car was gone. She'd left early, or maybe she hadn't come back at all. I didn't check. I went straight to my study. It had always been my room. The one place in the house she never reorganized or refreshed. Dark shelves, old notebooks, a desk scarred with years of work. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and opened my laptop. I didn't start with anger. I started with patterns. I pulled our bank statements first. We'd always shared accounts. She handled the day-to-day bills. I trusted her. That trust had been her greatest asset. It didn't take long. Hotel charges appeared like clockwork. Always midweek. Always the same boutique hotel near the riverfront in downtown Seattle. I hadn't noticed before because she'd mixed them between legitimate travel expenses. Flights, meals, ride shares. But when you stop assuming innocence, math becomes very honest. There were restaurant tabs for two at places she'd never taken me. Jewelry purchases I didn't recognize. Spas. Weekend conferences that didn't line up with any company calendar. I cross-referenced dates. Every hotel stay matched a meeting with Kirill. Same initials. Same excuse. I checked our shared calendar. She hadn't even tried to hide it. Then I found the pregnancy tests. 3 of them. Purchased weeks before she'd told me she was pregnant. The receipt timestamp hit me harder than anything else so far. It landed squarely in the window when I'd been in Vancouver, a detail I'd already known but never wanted to fully connect. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a mistake. It was planned. I kept going. Emails. We'd shared passwords for years. Another gesture of trust she'd repurposed into convenience. I didn't open everything, just enough. Enough to confirm that Kirill had no intention of leaving his wife. Enough to confirm that the plan had always been for me to stay. Enough to confirm that they'd discussed timing, perception, and my temperament like I was a variable, not a person. They wrote about me as safe. That word came up more than once. By mid-morning, I had stopped shaking. I called a lawyer. Not emotional, not dramatic. I asked questions, took notes, listened. Then I called my accountant. Then my bank. By noon, our joint account was frozen, not emptied, just protected, everything done by the book, clean, documented. I went upstairs and packed a bag. I didn't touch anything sentimental, no photos, no letters, just clothes and my laptop. When I reached the nursery we'd started planning, I paused. The half-assembled crib, the paint samples on the floor. I closed the door. That afternoon, Alina called. I let it ring. She texted instead. Then again. Then again. Finally, she left a voicemail, crying, saying she was scared, saying Kirill was angry, saying she didn't know what to do. That last part was almost true. I checked into a hotel downtown. Nothing fancy. Clean. Anonymous. That night I didn't drink. I made a list, not of revenge, of leverage. Kirill Morozov was careful, but not flawless. Men who think they're untouchable never are. I didn't need to ruin him. I just needed him busy, distracted, unable to control the narrative. I made one call. A former colleague. Corporate investigations, discreet, effective. I didn't give him a speech, just facts. By the end of the call, he understood exactly what I needed. 2 days later, Alina showed up at the hotel. She looked smaller, stripped of confidence, no makeup, wearing one of my old sweaters. She said Kirill had stopped answering her calls. She said he told her to deny everything if I pushed. She said he wanted her to claim the baby was mine in court. I listened without interrupting. Then I told her I knew. About the emails. About the receipts. About the plan. She sank into the chair like gravity had doubled. I didn't think you'd ever look, she whispered. That was the most honest thing she'd said in years. I told her the divorce would proceed quietly if she told the truth. No theatrics. No lies. She asked what would happen to Kirill. I said nothing, because by then the wheels were already turning, and once they started, they didn't need me anymore. Kirill reached out 3 days later. Not directly. His assistant emailed me requesting a brief professional conversation. No apology, no acknowledgement, just scheduling language, as if we were still discussing contracts instead of betrayal. I agreed. We met in a private conference room overlooking Lake Union. Glass walls, neutral furniture. The kind of place designed to make difficult conversations feel clinical. Kirill arrived alone. He looked tired for the first time since I'd met him. Not shaken, irritated. The confidence was still there, but it had edges now. He started by complimenting my restraint. I expected shouting, he said. Threats. You handled this maturely. I didn't respond. He sighed. Alina is emotional. She's not thinking clearly. I'm hoping you are. There it was again. Control through calm. He offered me a settlement, framed it as protection, generosity, a way to avoid unnecessary damage to everyone involved. I asked him one question. Have you told your wife? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. No, he said, and I don't intend to. I nodded. That told me everything. He leaned forward. You have to understand the position she's in. If this becomes public, she loses everything, her career, her stability. That affects the child. He said child, not son. Interesting. I asked him what he wanted. He said silence. He said time. He said cooperation. I told him I wasn't interested in any of that. That's when the mask finally slipped. His voice hardened. He warned me about reputations, about influence, about how easily narratives could be shaped if things turned adversarial. I stood. Kirill, I said calmly, you don't need to threaten me. If you had the power you think you do, you wouldn't be in this room. That landed. I left without shaking his hand. 2 days later, everything shifted. My investigator called. Kirill's finances weren't just aggressive, they were reckless. Shell companies, deferred taxes, paperwork that looked fine from a distance and collapsed under scrutiny. More importantly, his wife had noticed something. Not because of me, because patterns always surface eventually. All I did was make sure she saw where to look. I never contacted her directly, I didn't have to. Information moves on its own when it's ripe. By the end of the week, Kirill's office was audited. By the following Monday, his accounts were frozen. Alina called me that night, panicked. He says I ruined him, she cried. He says I owe him loyalty. I said nothing. 2 days later, Kirill was removed from his position pending investigation. His wife filed for divorce the same afternoon. The irony wasn't lost on me. Alina told the truth in court, not out of remorse, out of fear. The divorce proceeded cleanly. No drama, no lies, no false claims about the child. I signed the papers without ceremony. Kirill tried to contact me once more. I didn't answer. Some battles don't need a response. The city felt different after that. Lighter, as if a storm had passed without ever touching me directly. I moved into a small apartment near the water. Nothing luxurious, just quiet. One evening, as I unpacked, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even satisfied. I was free. The news didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. Quiet confirmations. The kind that don't make headlines but permanently alter trajectories. Kirill Morozov wasn't arrested immediately. Men like him rarely are. Instead, his world constricted, accounts locked, partnerships dissolved, invitations stopped arriving. Silence replaced influence, and silence is unbearable for men who survive on control. He pleaded a case I never followed closely. I didn't need the details. What mattered was that he was no longer directing anything. Not Alina, not the narrative, not me. Alina moved out of state. She sent one final message weeks later. Not an apology, not a confession, just a statement saying she hoped one day I would understand that she never intended to hurt me. I deleted it. Some intentions don't matter. The divorce finalized quietly. No spectators, no raised voices, just signatures and finality. I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd won, but because nothing was tethered to me anymore. I started rebuilding in small ways. Morning routines, long walks along the waterfront, cooking meals I liked without compromise, relearning the sound of my own thoughts without background tension. Friends noticed the change before I did. They said I looked calmer, sharper, less apologetic. One evening, months later, I sat alone at a cafe overlooking the bay. I was reading without checking my phone, something I hadn't done in years, when someone asked if the chair across from me was free. She was close to my age. Thoughtful eyes. No urgency in her voice. We talked casually, nothing heavy, no confessions, no explanations, just conversation that didn't feel like negotiation. That was when I realized how exhausting my old life had been. Not the betrayal, the pretending. Kirill eventually accepted a plea deal. Financial penalties, professional exile. A quieter fall than he deserved, but permanent. Alina gave birth to a boy. I felt nothing when I heard. No anger, no regret, just distance. That surprised me most of all. I hadn't escaped destruction. I'd escaped entrapment. I walked home that night under a sky that felt wider than it ever had before, aware that some endings don't announce themselves. They simply release you. Time didn't heal anything. That surprised me. What it did instead was create distance, enough space for clarity to take hold without emotion interfering. Distance from the lies, from the version of myself that had been quietly shrinking to keep someone else comfortable. I learned that betrayal doesn't arrive as chaos. It arrives as routine, as normalization, as small compromises you don't notice until they form a cage. Looking back, the signs had been there long before the dinner, long before Russian was spoken across a table like a private joke at my expense. I had ignored them because the story I wanted was easier than the truth I feared. That was my part in it, not the affair, not the manipulation, the choosing not to look. When the dust settled, people asked if I felt vindicated, if watching Kirill lose everything felt like justice. It didn't. Justice implies balance. What happened to him was consequence. What happened to me was awakening. I didn't win anything back. I simply stopped losing myself. Alina never contacted me again after the divorce was finalized. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she struggled at first. That reality was harsher without someone else managing it for her. That motherhood was lonelier than she expected. I wished her no harm, but I didn't wish her well either. Some chapters end without closure, and that has to be enough. What stayed with me wasn't anger. It was the quiet realization of how easily trust can be weaponized when it's unconditional, how dangerous it is to confuse stability with safety. I began to rebuild deliberately, not a new life, a truer one. I took fewer meetings, said no without explaining, traveled alone, read books slowly, learned to enjoy silence without interpreting it as disapproval. The woman from the cafe and I met again, then again after that. There were no declarations, no future promises, just honesty exchanged without pressure. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I wasn't being evaluated. I was simply present. That was the real victory, not that I spoke Russian when they thought I couldn't, but that I finally listened to myself when I had every reason not to. Betrayal didn't harden me. It clarified me. And clarity, I've learned, is worth more than loyalty built on lies. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.